Thanks very much for joining us for episode 4 of InTek, Freight and Logistics, the podcast. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my co-host for this edition, InTek President Shelley Austin. On this episode, we welcome the head of a woman-owned third-party logistics provider to discuss women in logistics, the industry in general, and her background. Plus, we'll check in with our Mercury Gate Minute to learn about karma with a C. It's no secret freight and logistics is a traditionally male-dominated industry, and while the gender gap has gotten smaller over the years, Gartner's 2022 Women in Supply Chain survey still tabs it at just 39% female, with an even smaller number, roughly 20%, of executive and leadership positions occupied by women. As March is Women's History Month, we thought it would be an excellent time to talk to Christy Knichel, the leader of a woman-owned logistics business, to discuss not only her experience relating to gender in the industry, but also to hear about her impressions of how it's evolved over time and the outlook moving forward. And to join me for the interview, we have our own president, Shelley Austin, who is also chair of the board of the Intermodal Association of North America and a longtime colleague of Christy's. Shelley, you want to take it away?
So, Christy, thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, 3PL is such a confusing title or label for a company. So tell us a little bit about what Knichel Logistics does so that our listeners can understand the 3PL, IMC, all those buzzwords that everybody gets really confused about. Can you give us a little bit of information on what you do at Knichel?
Yeah, absolutely. So Knichel first started out as an IMC, which is an intermodal marketing company, which is also further described as shipping with the railroad. A lot of people don't know what intermodal means. But obviously, as we built out the company, I feel like we've been called more of a 3PL as well because we've expanded into other modes of transportation, which is LTL, less than truckload, when you're shipping, say, 6 pallets or less, and full truckload. And that could include flatbeds, dry vans across the country, Canada and Mexico. So I feel being non-asset based, we provide services to our customer base across the country and have a lot of different options that we're able to utilize by being a third-party logistics provider instead of just an asset-based company, which would mean we own trucks, which we don't. So that's a little bit of education on what we do.
Awesome. So, Christy, I always feel like, and I could be wrong because this is just my personal opinion, but I always feel like the folks that start out in the railroad industry, especially like you on the ramp-to-ramp basis, managing the drayage yourself and in the contracts with the railroads, you start out with the most complicated mode of service, and then you've added the other services onto it. Would you agree that your team is probably a bit more educated and can be more of a hero to your customers because you've started in that space?
I would agree, yes, just because, as you described, there are a lot more moving parts to it. Instead of just one transaction with a truck, you're dealing with 4 different potential vendors on a rail side of it, the way that we do the ramp to ramp. So, yeah, there's a lot more education and work that goes into it. And it can be a very high learning curve for some people. And I would say even when I started 25 years ago, I picked up pretty fast, say within a couple months. But some people, it could take 6 months to kind of even learn all the different areas of it. And now it's kind of segregated where they come in and learn one part and then learn the next part and kind of go that way where, maybe even when, you even started, back then, it's like we had to do all of it and learn it all like right away. So definitely challenging. And I think that that's made our people a lot more knowledgeable.
So we touched on what your company does, kind of how it started. How did you get started in freight and logistics?
So I got started really by accident because I was actually going to college at the time. I was running a couple of pizza shops. I wanted to purchase a pizza shop and I was asking my dad about it. To be quite honest, I really didn't even know what he did, but I didn't realize he also owned a pizza shop back in the day. And he said, that's not what you want to do at a pizza shop bar. I know, right? He's like, you're never going to make enough money to be happy. He said, why don't you come work for me? So I was 19. I quit my job and then I went and, started working for him. And he was an agent for another company that does exactly what we do today. So I'm in my 25th year, but I worked my way up through the company and doing every role within my company, today, which was kind of awesome. It was one of those things where my dad just kind of kept throwing stuff at me and I was a hard worker. So I just did whatever he asked me to do and didn't realize I was really interviewing to be in the position I am today.
Yeah, that's got to give you a good perspective if you've kind of done all the jobs leading up to it to be able to oversee everything.
Yep.
So you just mentioned you've been doing it for about 25 years now. So talking about women in logistics in particular, how would you say the industry has changed generally over the course of time? And as a woman in logistics, how has that perspective changed over that time as well?
So it's been pretty interesting. Obviously, when I started, everything was very manual, hands-on. You had some technology, but it wasn't great. So I would say, from typing in a container number on the phone to now just getting information dumped into your system from technology and integrations with technology that can better streamline your workflows now has been a big change, actually a game changer, to be quite honest. And then being able to transfer that information and visibility to customers and vendors and partners and having data to actually make decisions, where before I felt like you were just operating on a daily basis and you had numbers to look at, but not really analyzing what data you have and what that means and what you can do with it. So it's definitely been significant change over the course of time. And as far as being a woman in logistics, obviously I started when I was 19, like I mentioned, and I might have been one woman in a room of 100 people, say at a railroad meeting. Maybe I'm one of 5 still in a room of a railroad meeting to this day, which is still interesting. It's still better. But depending on where you're at or what the function is, there are a lot more women in the room, but not necessarily in leadership or in management. But I will say, I feel like the industry is really trying hard to hear women, have them move up within their organizations. And part of that is also getting the men involved and having them lift women up and making sure we're looking at everyone as equal, not just men or even lifting up a woman and putting a woman in a position just because we want to say we're doing that, but making sure it's the right ones. And I think that's one of the biggest things, because I think women do want to be in the workforce, and being able to mentor them, coach them, help them with some leadership skills that maybe they might not learn. And I think we still have a ways to go, but I think, having the women that we do have in the industry, us being leaders, and even Shelley for that instance, being those mentors to other women and kind of pushing them and letting them know that, like, hey, you can do this too. And it's just building that network around you, which I think has kind of exploded more women into the industry. So it's fun to watch, and I'm excited to see where it's going to go in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah, Christy, I would agree with you. And I would say you made a comment that I thought was very important. You said, not placing a woman in a role just because that's where we want women to grow into. We have such powerful women, maybe not the percentage numbers that we would like to see, but there's some really powerful women in our industry. And the important part is they're executing and they're showing what they can do as far as the knowledge and education. And I think that's what's important and what should be noted. And we do want the numbers to increase, but I like your point, and it has to be somebody that has the knowledge and can make a true impact in our industry. That's really where we want the positions to be.
I agree. And one thing I want to add to that real quick too is I think the biggest differential is women have some skill sets that some men just don't have in communication, empathy. There's some different things that I feel like in businesses that are very important. And one of the things I was reading as a statistic recently was that having a woman in corporate leadership position correlates directly with the bottom line. And it was a survey that I looked at that they did on like 22,000 publicly traded companies in 91 countries. So the stats are there to show that having women in corporate positions will help a company make more money on the bottom line.
We mentioned the raw numbers, and you mentioned that there are certain areas where women are better represented, especially than what you noted when you first got into the industry. And in terms of leadership, one of the ways to sort of cultivate that a little bit better has got to be the fact that, you, Shelley, others in leadership are doing it and doing it well. How does that matter to somebody who's just coming in to be able to see, a young woman just starting out in the career, to see people in that leadership role already?
I think it's been tremendous. I can tell you I attract women to my company specifically because they like the fact that it's a woman-owned company or a woman-run company. And it's interesting because today, as we sit here, we have, I want to say, close to 71 employees, and 70% of my staff is women. And it's not that I'm being biased. It's just we attract more women that want to come in and work. And I feel like if they're thinking, if you can do it, I can do it too, but then supporting them. Because I think it's like asking the questions, how can I do this? Having the mentorship. And one thing I provide for my women leaders is leadership training and coaching. And I think it's important that we do those things and have that for the women so they feel that they can be successful.
And then seeing the proof versus just saying something. You know, a lot of people can say whatever they want to say, but if somebody can come into a company or come into an organization and see that someone else has done this already, that's got to be helpful.
Absolutely. And I feel like I'm living proof of like, I quit college. I just dived in. I did the job. You know, my dad didn't know it all, but I literally had to seek out help. I had to Google stuff. I had to find a way to figure it out. And now one of my jobs is trying to help other women not have to go through all the challenges I did and make it a little bit easier for them to be able to move up within a company.
So Christy, you know, you mentioned your dad, and being a woman in logistics and where you're at is phenomenal in and of itself. But let's put that aside. One of the things, just you in and of yourself is a huge success story in my opinion, because being a part of a family business, that's not easy. There's a lot of complications with being, part of a family business. Things were not handed to you, as you mentioned. You started out from ground zero. You did the job. You worked up. You had really no intention at that point in time of running the company. And I think even at some point in time, you thought about getting out of this industry, which we all know it's very hard to get out. You just don't get out. Once you're in, you're in. But tell us a little bit about that in regards to, focus on how the challenges have been in a family business with you, and also just kind of where you thought you'd take that step back, and then maybe that was the point to move you forward, and really get you where you wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely been the biggest challenge of my life is working with the family. I think people think, hey, we're a family business, and that's easy because you're trying to help your family. And I know my dad was trying to do something that he thought was good for all of us. And the unfortunate part is we all have different opinions. And I had a brother and sister involved in the company as well. And, I didn't realize my sister was competing with me for the role that I'm in today. Or, my brother didn't necessarily want my role, but my dad was trying to push him into something that he didn't want. And I think going through those ups and downs and trying to figure out, where your place is and what you need to do. But I will say when we opened the company in 2003, I had worked for my dad for 6 years already. And, he was very, tough on me. And I don't blame him for being tough, but it was just so tough that I did put my resignation in at one point, because instead of, my dad had like a style of, leadership that was definitely different than my style of leadership. But I know why he was hard on me, and it's made me who I am today. But I wanted to give up. I wanted to let go because I felt like I didn't have to do it this way or deal with this much stress in my life. But I ultimately, I think having that talk with my dad, and I think my dad realizing like the one child that he had that he really wanted to push forward was me. And he had to kind of take a step back himself, which he did. Actually, my dad ended up having a triple bypass not long after that conversation. And I say that with like, I appreciate everything my dad did, but like, it's interesting because he had to go out of the company for a couple months, and then he came back and was like, the business is still here. And it's like, yeah, of course the business is still here. So I kind of joke about that because it was like, I think he knew I could do it, but it was like a test. And, and I think the hardest part, I think throughout the years though, was ultimately him passing along the shares in the business to us kids. And then me having to make some tough decisions that a lot of people don't make in family business. And that is running the business, I feel, in a way that everybody sees that you're not favoritism towards the family, where, they get to do certain things or have monies or whatnot, but they're really not pulling their weight. And I mean, even for my dad, at times where I've had to tell him no, I've had to, cut things off with my sister at one point when, we bought her out of the company. And at the end of the day, like I realized if you want to build a business and you want to continue to grow, you have to do it the right way and not have those things happen, because people will see that and they're not going to work as hard for you. So I wanted to do the right thing, but doing the right thing made, it kind of pulled her family apart in many, many different directions from a financial standpoint. Just, my dad would always tell me, and, I love my dad. I'll just say he gave me a great opportunity, but he would always say family first, take care of the family. And I would tell him, you can't take care of the family if you don't take care of the business to take care of the family. And that was my mentality, that we couldn't do something different for family that we wouldn't do for someone else here, because they're going to see that and be like, why would I work harder for you to make you more money if you're not going to do the right things in the business? So I do talk pretty open about that, because a lot of companies that are family owned struggle with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Such a phenomenal story, Christy, and what you have accomplished up until this point. And you have such a road ahead of you of doing amazing things. Tell me, it sounds like your dad was definitely a mentor in his own way, but with everything you just said and how you were able to persevere through all of that stress and all of, accomplish so many things. Tell us a little bit about mentors in your life and, different ones that may have helped you kind of overcome those situations.
So the interesting thing is, I had my dad to an extent. There was only so much that he knew. I had a hard time reaching out, and I did get myself a leadership coach at one time for a short period of time because my dad didn't want to pay for it. But I had to kind of just force myself to make some phone calls and whatnot. But I didn't have a mentor, say, early on in my career. I had a few people that I worked with from a coaching standpoint or Sandler training, that type of thing. And then I would read some books on some people in the industry, like Sheryl Sandberg, for example. So later on in my career was really when, I would have some mentorship. And some of them were with men that my father actually worked with. One of them, me and you both worked with, Jeff Brashears. I consider him a mentor.
The Three Amigos.
Yes, exactly. That's her name. Obviously, reaching out with you. And then there's a couple other women that, I have a lot of women and men that reach out to me for mentorship, but I also have it go the other direction where it's they might ask me something and I ask them, well, how did you build your business to this size and whatnot? And so that's probably been more in the last 7 years of my life. And it's been extremely important because every person has a different perspective or answer maybe on the same question you're going to ask them. And it's good to get different opinions from different people and not being afraid to reach out, where I felt like I didn't really have that network to reach out early on. But some of the men that are in the industry now that still worked with my dad are probably the go-tos, and Jeff is definitely one of them. And, some of them have actually, come and gone, but it's definitely interesting how my path was because I really didn't have the mentors back then that I have now.
Well, I think that's phenomenal. And the fact that you are such a mentor for others to be able to create that for other, women, even not just women, but younger kids with the education and coming up through high school and college and mentoring them into a logistics career. I see you do that all day long, and you constantly are working on the education with TIA, with IANA, and also in the colleges. So I think, it seems like that's a big passion for you.
Yeah, no, it certainly is, because I feel like it was so hard for me to learn and do what I do today. And I just had this work ethic that was a very instilled thing in me. And I feel like if I can help someone not have to go through the pain I did, it's definitely worth it. And then it comes back in other ways. You don't know where that person's going to be down the road. Can they help you with something else? It's a two-way street is how I feel.
Yeah, it really sounds like part of the fact that maybe you were struggling to find that mentorship to some degree at the beginning. You mentioned earlier, you're trying to make the path a little bit smoother for the next group that's coming in.
Absolutely. I feel like that's our job.
It's all related, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Jeff Brashears was a guest on episode 1 of this podcast, in case anyone's listening and wants to go back and hear from him a little bit. Going back to a more general look at the industry, I mean, you're a leader and experienced in it, and you've gone through the ups and the downs, and we just came off of this kind of crazy 2-year period of nonstop peak, and now there's a definite kind of correction in the market. But where do you see the freight market right now, and what's your sort of outlook as we move forward through the rest of the year and beyond?
I mean, I will say right now, at least January through March, it seems more of a normalized market prior to COVID, to be quite honest. It's typically slower this time of year, at least for us. And I know there's some seasonality with products and whatnot. We're not seeing a huge uptick in that seasonality at this point. But I do think because of the massive 2-year peak we had, it's probably going to be hard for people to realize hey, we're probably back to pre-COVID levels and normalization at this point. And then what happens is you have a lot of companies that come into this market when it's hot. And now you have more companies trying to survive in this market that we're in. And you're going to see a lot of companies probably go out of business going forward. So I feel like in my 25-year career, we've always had these ups and downs. Obviously, COVID brought something a little bit different, but it's still kind of like you had that real high. Now we're down to more of a normalized market. but I think it's going to come back a little bit stronger, maybe third quarter going into fourth quarter. And things will be a little bit, heavier than what they were first part of this year, but not necessarily where we were at the last 2 years. And, that's really kind of what I'm predicting based on what we see and just kind of what we know. But I think the most important thing is companies, I feel, can't just come into the market and try to ride this wave and think that they're going to make it out of it. I think companies like myself or Shelley's, for example, like we do other services and try to find other ways to bring in revenue and do things uniquely to where we can survive these downticks and the other services that we provide, and really pivoting and making changes and being agile during these times. And we're good at it because we've been doing it for so long. So I think some of the carriers that fall off, or maybe the other companies, not that I wish them bad, but it's just what happens in our industry. And that's kind of where I see the market going towards the end of the year.
You mentioned early on in our discussion how one of the things that's evolved over time is technology too. So how has the ability to integrate technology sort of cemented your business and the way that you can be agile?
I will say it's definitely a game changer, because if you don't have the technology or the ability to have the technology at your fingertips to make those changes quickly, and which I do think being a smaller company, it makes it even easier for us to adjust in times like this as well. It's crucial. It's almost like live or die, I hate to say, but if we can't like if you can't get forward with technology right now and you don't have that, you're not going to survive. But I also feel like, again, like you have the bigger companies that have technology as well that's maybe similar to ours, but just because they're big doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be better. I think it's harder for them to change in times like this, where we can quickly make those changes at a smaller size with that technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that one of the challenges there, Christy, and you tell me, but it's the adaptability of your team members to the technology and the advances of technology. I think, that's the one challenge that we all have, but I've seen, you guys within your organization, you do a great job in getting all that information to your team and the training. And I just think that's probably a lot of where technology is great, advancing with technology is great, but if you can't get the team members to adopt it and move forward with it, then it's not going to do anything for you.
Well, you brought up a great point, because one of the things I'm proud of is the fact that we've had people work for me for a long time, anywhere from 12 to 24 years. And that is the biggest challenge. And we did have, a TMS change last year on our trucking side. We had a CRM change. We also had a finance change, and we have 2 more changes we need to do this year. And the biggest challenge was probably the older group of people that we've had here wanting to change because they've been here a long time using the same tools for a long period of time. And I think the newer generations coming in seem to be more adapt to it just because that's what they're growing up with. And say the people of our age have not necessarily. So yeah, that's definitely been a struggle. But I will say it's been something that we're just, hey, we're pushing forward. This is what we need to do to survive and grow. And if we don't, we're not going to be here. And that's the attitude that we take towards it.
Absolutely. Christy, I'm going to take us back just a bit, because we've talked about all these amazing things, but here's what I really want to know. And there's, a lot of people in companies that are focusing on this right now, but you are a successful woman-owned business. You're constantly traveling. You're talking on panels. You're out there and really in the light of everything and constantly on boards. And you're a strong mother and a successful mother. You're a great wife. You have a beautiful family. How in the world do you do work-life balance, my friend?
I think that's the question everybody wants an answer to, that they're not going to get like the perfect answer. It's really hard. I will say, I think the biggest thing is I always say business first, family first. If family does need me, family is always going to, get me first. But they also know that the business brings what we need to support the family and everything else. But I think, my husband is a stay-at-home dad, and that's been very helpful, but it's also been, I think, a challenge for him. Well, I know it's been a challenge for him. We try to work through that, and I think it's a balance, as far as having conversations, communication. I need a lot of structure in my life, and it's been hard for my husband specifically, but I'm very structured. And I will say it doesn't make it any easier as far as all the different things that have going on, because I think you get one thing done and then something else comes up. But I think having the base structure there and a foundation and a schedule. Again, my husband's kind of like, I didn't grow up that way. I don't have structure. And I'm like, well, I need structure. And this is, how we do it. But I do think, for me to kind of get that, I have to sometimes take a step back and try to delegate more, get some things off my plate so I can truly focus on the things I need to, and finding time to take for myself, which has really been hard. I'm not going to pretend like it's easy to do that. But, I think one thing that's helped me is working with a leadership coach that's trying to hold me accountable to myself for things that I need to do throughout the day, and really take that time for myself, for the family. And really I think that's really what the biggest thing is, because not everybody has a luxury that I have as far as having like the stay-at-home parent with a child. Like I was just gone for a week last week at the big woman-owned convention in Nashville. And I came home and the first thing I did was like put everything down, met with my husband and my son. We went out to dinner, went to a movie, taking that time to spend that time when I can, because I'm leaving again this week for Chicago. So,
right.
So yeah, it's not easy. Sometimes it's late nights. It's trying to get up early. But I think the best thing that I can say now at where I'm at in my career is really looking at what am I involved in? What do I need to be involved in? What can I pass off to other people to help? And what do I really need to focus on so I can really make sure I don't miss out on family? Because that's the one part that will, your family has to come first, even though I say business first too. You have to put the business aside at some point too.
So tell us one thing, Christy, for me, the crazy runner at 4, there's some peace in that for me. I would say another thing for me outside of work is I just love the water, sitting on a dock at a lake. What is the one thing that people don't know about Christy Knichel? And I feel bad because we've been friends forever and I haven't asked you this. Is it an ocean? Is it a lake? Is it riding on a motorcycle? Tell us what brings you, something outside of work. Give us something where you're like, this is my place. This is where I relax.
I think it's two things. I'm sorry. But two things. I do think riding on our motorcycle and camping.
Nice.
I love to do the camping, being in the nature, getting the peace. We have a camp that we go to in the summertime that we take my son to. And honestly, I don't get any internet connection, so I can't even work. So it forces you to step away.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
You kind of need to be forced sometimes, I think, right?
Yes, you have to. Otherwise, let me just tell you a quick story. When I was in Vegas on a trip recently, one of my friends flew out and her husband to kind of, hang out with my husband and spend some time with us after the event. But she did give me advice and said, sometimes you need to just put your phone down and be in the moment. And to the point where even a person at a restaurant last week in Nashville told me the same thing. He said, you've been sitting here and I watch you on your phone and you haven't even put your phone down to eat. And that starts making me think like, oh, yeah, I guess I really need to start doing that. So
I like it. Be in the moment. That's good.
Yes.
Speaking of eating, and you mentioned at the beginning how you started out managing pizza shops. So which style of pizza is the best style?
So I like a lot of different pizza, but I would say your traditional, authentic Italian, fresh made, thin cut, but it has to be cooked properly. I am very, very like when I go to a place and like it's not cooked the whole way, I'm like, make sure you tell your people. It's probably a bad thing. But when you don't cook the pizza perfect, it doesn't taste great. So that's a big part of it too.
You can definitely tell you ran a pizza place because whatever you just said there was like my Starbucks order. So I didn't even know that was the description of a pizza. So good job on that one.
Yeah.
And Chicago, you're going to Chicago, you said. What are your feelings on the deep dish? Does that count as a pizza or what do you think there?
I guess it does, but it seems like it's like too much for me. I don't like the tomato. I'll try it, but it's not like my favorite. I like that greasy, thin, like right hot out of the oven pizza.
And lastly, we have baseball season coming up soon, just a couple days from now as we record this. What's your outlook on the Pirates this year?
So I will say this. I'm not the biggest baseball fan, but I do know that baseball is not that different from business. So if you don't invest in the business, don't expect to consistently win.
Yes, well played.
So with roughly the third lowest payroll in baseball, I expect them to finish near the bottom of the pack, and they will probably not be good. Just being honest here.
Love it.
Great. Christy, thanks so much for joining us. Is there anywhere people can go to find out more about you and or your business?
Yeah, absolutely. KinishLogistics.com. We're also on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. So you can find us at any of those places or, just obviously look up my name, Christy Kinishel.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
On our Mercury Gate Minute, one of our experts on Mercury Gate Transportation Management System software, TMS for short, answers a question, outlines a feature, or offers up a quick tip on using the platform. Here's Tracy to tell us about Karma.
Karma is a tool for active management of carrier information. It can maintain your carrier's insurance, safety, hazmat, performance, assets, and many other types of data. Karma enterprises share information within the Mercury Gate system about your carriers, drivers, and equipment vital to day-to-day operations for Mercury Gate users. Karma keeps Mercury Gate synced with all the information about active qualified carriers. Mercury Gate is connected to Karma and can be accessed from the user's pull-down menu in the upper right of the Easy Vision interface. Once Karma is enabled, the view in Mercury Gate changes to pull carrier information directly from Karma, which is called the Karma Carrier View. The carrier details in Mercury Gate remain. However, users can now view and edit information on numerous tabs.
For more information on InTek's Mercury Gate partnership, visit www.intechfreight-logistics.com/TMS. Thanks very much for listening to InTek Freight and Logistics, the podcast, and many thanks to Christy Kinishel for joining us. Check out the links in the description to learn more about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen. If you have questions, email us at podcast@intechlogistics.com and visit intechfreight-logistics.com for more about what we do. For Shelley Austin, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll talk to you next time.